Hello, everyone, and good evening. Diversity has taken on new meaning given the significant divisions we've all witnessed. Racial, political, gender, and class divisions have engulfed and tested our nation. We have gone largely from celebrating our diversity to questioning the value of it. How do we get back to a place where our differences are not what we see first, but rather our humanity? That work starts with us today, right here. Hello, my name is Guadalupe Hurt, and I am the co-founder of Second Act Women. I want to welcome you to The Scoop and Ask the Expert series that we've launched to make it easier for our community to ask experts questions in a safe space. In today's segment, we're talking unconscious bias. What is it? Why should you care? If you choose, what can you do about it? But before we delve into the show, a couple of ground rules. The first is, our goal for today is to create a judgment-free zone, a space to empathize, ask, listen, and learn, full stop, no exceptions. But before we can do this, we are asking you to agree to certain terms and honor these agreements. We're first asking you to engage actively or silently. Be respectful. Seek to understand first and then question second. Agree to disagree. Intolerant comments are not welcome. This is a place for us to learn, grow, and communicate. And get ready to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Let's now dive into the main part of our conversation, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome not just two experts, but two amazing women that I've now called friends that are also doing equally important work to advance this conversation. I want to welcome Jen Wynn and Brenda Aviles to The Scoop. A little bit about these ladies before I bring them on. Jen is the founder and CEO of Evolve Coaching and Consulting. She works with women leaders to unlearn their social conditioning by teaching them how to trust their bodies, handle the flood of emotions that otherwise inhibit their growth, and to walk away with a deeper sense of self and possibility. And now Brenda has over 20 years of experience in education, specifically focused on social justice. She is an accredited transformative coach and is currently a curriculum specialist coaching teachers on anti-racism work in the classroom. She received her master's in urban and multicultural education, recognizing that the needs of urban students were not only unmet, but misunderstood. And with that, I'd love to welcome you ladies both to The Scoop. How you doing? Oh, let's see, you guys are both white. Let's see, there we go. All right, let's try that again. How you doing?
Hi.
So excited to have you both here, and thank you so much for leaning in with us to have this conversation. I swear, when I was talking to Barb about having this, I couldn't think of two more perfectly amazing people to have this convo with. So it really warms my heart that you ladies said yes to us. So thank you for that. So ladies, what I want to tee off first is, before we open this up to questions, so honestly, what we're really wanting is to have our community come in and ask questions about unconscious bias. We're talking the isms, we're talking racism, bigotry. We're gonna open up the conversation so that you get your, whether it's curiosity questions answered here today if possible. But before we do that, I want to go in and first set the stage on a couple of things that we need to kind of make sure we're on the same page about. And these were really definitions that you ladies kind of brought to the forefront, saying it's important for these ladies to know what these mean so that there's no misunderstanding when we use these terms, what we're saying. So let's dive in here first with Jen. I'll have you start with unconscious bias.
Sure, thanks. So unconscious bias, we felt like this was really important because it's kind of central to this work that we understand what it means. Our brains are designed to protect us and to keep us alive, and our current world programs us with a bunch of stereotypes. And so those two things go together in a way that creates the perfect conditions for us to be holding stereotypes about groups without realizing it. And the way that shows up is sometimes we have stated values that actually don't align with our unconscious bias. And so as Brenda and I get into the conversation today, one of the things we'll talk about is how to really lift those beliefs from our unconscious so that we're aware of them and can actually take action that's aligned with our values and aligned with racial justice. And the second one on this slide is prejudice. And Brenda's going to share about some other definitions, but it's important that we understand that prejudice can happen in lots of different places. It's simply a preconceived judgment or an opinion. And I'm going to have hand it over to Brenda to do the next couple so that they're related.
Yeah, so let me tee those up here for you, girl. Okay.
So we know that prejudice is a precursor to racism. Usually they go hand in hand. And this is steeped in the belief that we have one race that is inherently superior to another in this particular country, right? And the thing that's interesting and controversial around this is this whole notion of reverse racism. And I just want to make it really clear that racism is attached to power, and that's what makes it a tool that keeps people oppressed, you know, in our particular country. And then we have bigotry, of course, and it's that, you know, that uncle that won't change. You know, I keep thinking I'm going to date myself, Archie Bunker, right? You know, just is committed to their opinions, committed to their belief system, and is unwilling to really shift in any capacity. So I just want to make sure that everyone is clear on the definitions, because sometimes we're coming in with a different point of view or a different idea.
Yeah, no, I think that's okay. So let's see. So is there like a reverb, right? Or something like that? It sounds a little, or is that just, maybe that's just me? But anywho, okay, well, let's keep going. Well, no, and I think that's important to understand the idea of what definitions, because I think what happens is a lot of terms are thrown out there sometimes, and people create their own assumptions about what happens, and they apply their own lens. And then what ends up happening is they never go back to fact check it, and they keep just layering on it. And then it gets worse and worse ingrained. And then that's when it becomes a very deep-rooted idea that may be totally false in some instances, because that they haven't done the fact checking on, which could be, you know, cause for a recipe for disaster, right? Well, let me kind of go through here and let me see if there are any questions kind of coming in. But okay, so that was, okay, so someone was saying that there was a lot of echo, but there you go. Oh, I think we figured it out. Okay, so let's dive into some questions. And ladies, this is an opportunity for you to really lean in with us. Again, there's no question that is off the table. So if you've been thinking about something or you're curious about something, now is the time to really ask these questions and take advantage of these two experts and what they could share to help answer your question and hopefully even offer greater understanding. But let's tee this off. So some research argues that most are aware of their biases, attitudes, and beliefs. And so it's not necessarily unconscious, but more conscious bias. What do you guys think about that? Let's start with you, Jen.
So I have not read that research. The research that I read talks about the ways that people, like especially for white folks, we believe and are good white people, right? So I'm a good white woman. Maybe I say I don't see color, or I feel warmth and kindness towards everyone. And there are ways that different commercials, different movies, the way that news is portrayed, the way that characters in books are portrayed, that infiltrate our thinking from the time that we're very young until current times. And so the research that I am most familiar with really talks about the way that it's actually deeply in our subconscious. Things like different stereotypes around angry Black men. Brenda, help me out. Remember, what was the story I shared with you? Oh, I know what it was. For example, I had spent my life's work doing anti-racist work in myself, for myself, in my career, in my family. And one thing I noticed lately is, so we're all wearing masks when we're out in public, and I live in California and we're super pro-mask out here. And I noticed that I was crossing the street and a Black man was walking toward me, and he had a mask on that was like a bandana kind of mask. And immediately I tightened up and I was like, what the heck? It was fear. There was nothing scary about him. I don't have that reaction when I see women in a mask that looks like a bandana. I don't have that reaction when I see other men of other ethnicities in a mask that looks like a bandana. But somewhere deep in me is, that guy's a robber, or he's going to hurt me. And so even though I would consciously say, I don't do that, I did do that. Like, we do that. We all do that. That's what unconscious bias is.
So who do you think are the main contributors to forming that? Like, if you were to identify certain influential groups in our lives, who would you say that we need to sit? Because oftentimes then that means we need to go back, we need to audit, these inherited beliefs or these ideas that we now are bringing into our everyday. But where do we start with that?
Brenda, I want to hand it to you because I feel like Brenda and I both have a really, we found out that we actually did the same coaching program that's really grounded in doing a deep internal inventory. So I kind of want to hand it to Brenda. Maybe you can speak more about that. But my initial reaction is it's actually not the external. A lot of anti-racist work is focused on like fixing outwardly, and actually even in that story, the work for me was noticing that in my body and being like, that's not okay. That's not my values. I'm actually going to untrain myself. So Brenda, I don't want to say any more.
Okay. So a few things that I want to mention. One, we get a lot of external messaging, yes, from the media and from our families and from our experiences, right? But to Jen's point, the work really isn't, let's change the media. I mean, that's a part of it, but it's also, I have to change myself and how I'm viewing the world and the messages that I'm distributing and receiving. The other thing is that I'm sure Jen still thinks she's a good white woman. And she is, right? But she's also a woman who noticed and named that when she saw this Black man, she has to sort of sit with that. A lot of us would just dismiss that. And the thing that's really central to that too is somewhere inside of her, she subscribes to that belief, which is why she had the reaction. Right. And so a lot of us do, even though we don't want to, because if we admit it, then that makes us bad and we don't want to be bad. Right. But if we don't admit it, name it, acknowledge it, and then change it, then it's going to stay there. And then we pass it on to our children, because our children will see our bodies tense up when we see people of color. And then they'll do the same thing, because if mom is scared, then I should be scared too. And so it is a lot of internal work.
Okay. I mean, it's a study that talks about how they did a study where they had women carrying their baby. And when they would have different men just like walk by on the sidewalk. And when Black men walk by, women tuck their baby in just a little, like not consciously again, but just a little. And babies internalize that.
Wow.
Babies internalize. Yep.
And this is the little things. Yeah.
Yes. And this is why I want to say, like, a big pushback that I get is that children are too young. We shouldn't be having these conversations with kids. But babies already have received this messaging. So it is imperative that we speak to our children about it.
Okay, so we've got a question here that I think is a really good one. It says, how do we unmold the trauma? Who wants to take that one?
That is a loaded question, because trauma has many, many different levels. And we cannot ignore, right, the levels of trauma that are there. And it's also not as simple as saying, well, I'm going to do this and then the trauma's gone, because we know that that's not the case. Trauma lives in the body. It has body memory. And so it is a really complex question that I certainly am not an expert in trauma in order to answer it, but I can say that you begin with what Jen was talking about. You start by noticing it, and making sure that you have a support system to talk about it. Like, what was the traumatic event? Because, for example, when you think about teachers and police officers who are working in, communities where they see a lot of their stereotypes fulfilled, that also becomes traumatic, right? And so how do you then address that with support? And also, you gotta call a thing, people.
So true.
And I think that support is key, because there are people who have backgrounds in how to we can learn to sit with trauma. We can learn to metabolize trauma in our body, but we can't do it alone. And so it really is about being in partnership, whether it's with a coach or a group situation where it's a group that focuses on it. But yes, I'm seeing lots of resonance around name and acknowledge. Yeah. And that is hard, and it's painful. And I think we are taught to run away from pain, to run away from trauma, to power through, to ignore it and suppress it. And what the research is saying is that actually then it gets passed down generationally. It gets carried out in our genes, it gets carried out in our unconscious belief systems. And so learning to, there are like actual breath practices and movement practices to lean into those and actually learn that we can tolerate big feelings. We can tolerate big pain. And that pain lessens as we learn to process it. Lupe, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, and I was going to say what I think a lot of people, and myself included, right? We struggle being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We struggle being in a situation where we feel like we're going to, make someone else uncomfortable, or we're going to say something that's going to trigger a certain response. And so we shy away or we walk that line. And what ends up happening is that we just end up creating a bigger hole for ourselves because we never really address it. We decide to actually go around it versus through it. And the development, the growth, the opportunity, the mindset change happens when you go through it, not around it.
So I just want to name the three big ones. I think it's, embarrassment. I'm embarrassed that I feel this way and that I think this way. The second one is vulnerability. Do I want to admit this? And then the last one is shame. And when you feel shame, and Jen and I talked about this, that's usually when you get paralyzed and then you don't act. And so the question that you have to ask yourself is, is this worth passing on? I don't think that it is.
Yeah. And I think any action upholds our current situation. And our current situation is one that oppresses some people. And so when in that moment of choice to say, I don't want to speak out because I don't want to be uncomfortable, what you're also choosing is to uphold an oppressive paradigm. So it might feel comfortable in that moment, but it's actually really harmful for you to not be able to live as your full self. And for for myself as a woman, a white woman, it's different than women of color or people of color. But then is creating a system that is oppressive to folks of color or to women or to like you talk about all the isms.
Yeah. Well, so then we've got another question here from my other half who's not joining us today. She talks about, let's put it out there. What is white privilege? We'll start with the white woman on the screen.
Yeah. So white privilege, when I think about privilege, I like to think about it in terms of earned privileges and unearned privileges, right? Earned privileges, like your last guest has a PhD, I think she said. She earned that. She went to school and earned that, right? As a white woman, I have a bunch of things that are true for me that I did not earn. So I can assume that when I go to a store, I won't be followed. People won't ask do you need help? Really saying why are you here? I can assume that no one will tell me I speak good English. I can assume that no one will think I'm not American. I can assume that when I go into my son's school, lots of people will look like me or sound like me. So there's all these ways those are privileges. It's shown to me through my entire life that really I can do or be anything because there are white folks in positions of power all over the place. That's privilege. That's white privilege. There's an article called The Invisible Knapsack that is old. I cannot recommend it more highly. And there's a counterpart to it actually that's about, and I'm happy that if there's a way that we can share these articles with you and you can post them on this
we can post them. Yep.
Because there's another one about white privilege in schools. So I have a mixed race son, so the analogy doesn't work anymore with me, but if I had a white child, I would be able to assume that he would see himself reflected in almost all of the books. I can assume that he will feel heroic in lots of history, that he will feel like he's a good, the fact that he is a good person will be continually reaffirmed as a white student. If he's not a white student, so that's the ways that white privilege shows up. And there's a wonderful analogy of a fish in a water bowl that doesn't know it's wet because the water's all around it. And so that's how white privilege is for white folks. We don't even realize when it's happening or when we have it. Because it just
Go ahead, Brenda.
Because the other part of that too is white women or white people in general don't have to talk about their experiences as white people. Doesn't exist.
Well, it's tokenism, right? I think right now there's a person on social media who's a white woman who just got called out for saying some things that were really offensive and racist. What's interesting is, as a white person, I might feel defensive and like, oh, but I'm not like that, which doesn't actually happen very often for white folks. If one white person misbehaves, it doesn't often get attributed to us as a whole race. However, that is not the case for folks of color oftentimes.
Yeah, very true.
And that's white privilege.
Yeah. So we've got another question here. So from Verona, she's asked, what is reverse racism? Right, we'll let you run through this one.
It doesn't exist. However, there are some people that feel that people of color, Black people and people of color, can be racist against white folks. And what's interesting about that is that in order for racism to really be effective and actually happen, there has to be some sort of power tied to it. And we are not the dominant folks in this country. Therefore, we don't have access to power in the same ways that white folks do, right? We're underrepresented in Congress, so we're not making policies, we're not making laws. We're underrepresented in big institutions, so we don't have the power to keep people out from coming in. And so, we can be prejudiced, but the idea of actually stopping someone from like getting a position or gaining access, we don't have that kind of power in this country. But that's the idea of reverse racism, that Black people and people of color can be racist against white folks.
And so I love that all the questions that are now coming in. So we've got a question from Angie. She says, is it appropriate or expected to acknowledge your bias to the person it was projected on? Or is that asking them to take on even more than they already do? I know that my other half definitely experienced a lot of, when everything happened with George Floyd. I know she, it was hard, as for many people that saw that. But then this idea of like, hey, I want to learn now, educate me. Became, a burden on someone else and became a burden on her as a Black woman. So let's dive into this and what does this mean and what can we do to be more cognizant, or how does that work? Jen, we'll start with you.
That's fine. I'm happy to go first. And I feel like we keep going first with me. Brenda, do you want to go or you want me to go first?
I want you to go first, and I've already written my notes to piggyback.
I think what the thing I see first in this is it appropriate or expected to acknowledge your bias to the person it was projected on. So what I'm seeing in that question is, if I say something that, whether I realize it or not, there is some implicit bias in that. Is it and it offends or causes harm to someone? Should I then do something with that person, or is that then putting it on them to do more than they already have? Mm-hmm. So I think that is a brilliant question. And for myself, what I like to encourage folks to do, I'm assuming that if you realize it, there's something that happened, whether it was like the person said back to you, hey, that was not okay, and so I feel like for me, it's check your body. If you're in a place where you can have a conversation when you receive that, then I think you say, I really appreciate you telling me that. I didn't know that, and I really am thankful that you told me. So now I know, and I really, truly apologize for causing harm. I promise to do better. Not, that wasn't my intent. Not, oh, but no, you misunderstood. No. It is our job to listen to folks of color when they tell us we're causing harm and to take it and learn from it. If you are not in a position because you're activated to do that, just say, I hear you, and I want to take some time to think about that because I really want to respond thoughtfully. Mm-hmm. If you cannot do the rest. Those are my 2 sentences.
Yeah, Brenda.
Yeah, I just, 2 things. So impact and intent, right, Jen? We've talked about this, right? So it may not have been your intention, but that doesn't mean that the impact, right, isn't going to be felt. Like if there was a negative impact, even though that wasn't your intention, you have to honor the negative impact. It happens. And what happens is that when you become defensive, you make us work harder to be believed. And there's a history of that in this country already, right? We are not believed. From medicine to the law, to courts, to schools, just right all around. And then the other thing that I want to say is I'm really triggered by the whole educate me thing, because we had to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
I think y'all are smart. I think y'all can figure it out too. There are so many resources now that can no longer be, an excuse. But that goes back to this notion of white privilege, right? You have the privilege of not attending a training. You have the privilege of dropping out of an event because your life is more important, right? We don't often have that privilege. And so it's really important to, be cognizant of those things. And if you do feel like you're going to react, stop. Stop and just walk away, because it's better to respond. And sometimes, like, I need a few days to respond sometimes. So just take the time.
Yeah, and on that comment, I love what Verona said here, and I know that also is something that I check your body. Your body will be the #1 indicator of, like, man, did I just step over the line? Or am I, like, treading on a fine line here? Should I, et cetera. So you feel it. So if you feel it, that's like all your human triggers saying, flashlight, like, back up from this, what are we doing here? And take the time, like, to regroup.
And I want to acknowledge that as we're having this conversation, nothing has, but I needed to take a breath because I'm triggered, right? And I have all these feelings coming on inside of me as we talk about all of these things, even though this is work that I do, right? And so I've been conditioned already, because I've done this work for so long, that I can sort of sit with it and sit through it. But I do want to acknowledge that even though I haven't heard anyone, I don't think today, right, in this conversation, my body is still speaking to me, and it's still saying, okay, you're getting worked up. Okay, you're starting to feel some things. Okay, take a deep breath.
Yeah. And I think what's very important is understanding those triggers and then knowing how to respond to that, because I think that may perhaps even create better opportunities for us to have these conversations, because these conversations can't be swept under the rug. They need to happen. But if you shy away from recognizing those triggers and then having solutions to that, then you're saying, I'm going to just evade it all completely, and then no progress will happen. So I love the idea of being aware of those triggers and then having something to work through them to make sure that you can have these conversations. Question on that. So I guess, would you happen to say, are there maybe 1 or 2, like you talked, Brenda, about, I'm feeling the emotions and I'm feeling, but I've learned to work with it. Do you have maybe 1 or 2 suggestions about what women could do if they found themselves where they start to notice their body acting up? What have you said? Walk away, take some time. But is there something else that maybe, any other tips that you might be able to offer the community about if you find yourself in a situation like that, what to do?
So I'm going to just speak, like, this is really tricky because okay. So yes, deep breaths always. So deep breaths, acknowledge, right? Acknowledge. So right now my armpits are sweating. I know that. It's okay. It's okay. So that, okay, I'm nervous. Okay, I'm getting worked up. So I took a deep breath. Last week, something happened at work, and I am very outspoken. I'm very comfortable with confrontation, but I know that can be detrimental to growth, right? If you're not ready. Took some time off, walked away. For people of color, for Black people and people of color, self-care is really important, right? And also knowing when to engage. You don't always, you don't have to accept the invitation to the fight or to the party, right? You can always walk away. It's not your job to save the world. And people gotta learn. You can't be here teaching everybody. So those are just a few things that I can say. Jen, I'm sure, can offer more as I try and breathe.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think those are great. And I think it's just the awareness that comes with it. And I think with anything, just like the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. But the idea of at least leaning in and doing it is, I think, a great starting point. So here's another question that we have from Cheryl. She talks about, how do you deal with those who are in your life, family, friends, that don't talk about the discrimination that affects you, happening, for example, the Asian Pacific Island community that's being targeted with hate crimes of late. Those people that perhaps maybe choose to kind of like swipe it under the rug and just continue to be like, blinders, I don't see anything, and I'm not contributing to this, so it's not my fault. How do you work in those situations? How do you have these conversations with people that maybe just choose not to acknowledge them? So Brenda, since you answered the last one, Jen, let's start with you on this one.
I would say the first thing is there is lots of self-management that happens for me in those moments, right? So I'm using the skills that Brenda said. I'm like taking big breaths, like real big breaths. The power of noticing and naming is really to give you a little space from the thing, whatever that feeling is, that overwhelming emotion, so that it doesn't feel like it is you. You can like separate, like Brenda's like, I'm feeling nervous and sweaty armpits. Like, okay, I have a little separation from it then. It can step back a little. When I read this, I feel some shame because I think lots of people who are doing that look like me. And I also feel frustration because I don't understand how you are a human in this world and you don't acknowledge the pain that's being caused to certain groups right now. And so I guess as a tool, what is helpful, because I have people in my family or in my extended world who fall into this group. And I think what I try and practice, which I'm not sure is the right thing, but I try and practice really holding truly compassion and curiosity. That like, I think it comes from a place of ignorance. I think it comes from a place of privilege because they're not aware of the privilege. And so when I go to judgment, I'm not effective in my conversations, and I know that. So if I can come from a place of curiosity or of offering, like, hey, I just want to put this out there. I know that your neighbor comes from whatever country, whatever. Like if it's an Asian American family that lives next door, I know that your neighbor is an Asian American family. Mm-hmm. You might want to just check on them and see how they're doing. There's lots of violence happening. I know that lots of people are afraid to leave their house.
Yeah.
Or so that they see it from an empathy place, but so I'm not coming at people from judgment. I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah. Brenda, you want to build?
So the other thing, speaking to that point, is also that there are people who believe that if they don't talk about it and they don't acknowledge it, it doesn't exist. That's one. And then the other one is I don't have the language or the tools, yes, right, to actually engage in this conversation. So I always say honey versus vinegar, right? You get more bees with honey than with. Sometimes it just takes you acknowledging their discomfort, right? And saying something like,
yes,
maybe you're not comfortable talking about this, but I'm in my feelings right now because of what's going on in my community, and I just don't have the capacity to engage right now. And that's that. Like, without apologizing, I just don't have the capacity right now. I cannot give you what I do not have, right? And sometimes family members are just also, blinders, like survival. I've got to survive. I've got to get ahead. I've got to make it because, that's the only choice that I've had. And so I always, this is a weird suggestion, but it's one that I'm going to give. So I used to be an elementary school teacher. And so I resolve everything. And I know this is controversial too, but here's a great book. Right? That's how I used to open up conversations with my students. And then the other thing is, what would you say to a fourth grader? Right? So don't come at someone with all of your intellectual knowledge, and don't come at someone with all of your feelings, but think about how do I scale this down? And it's hard when you're in that community and you're in that group, right? So it's hard when I, as a person of color, have to sort of bring it down for someone who doesn't have the awareness about my experience in this world.
Yeah. Well, there's a powerful advice. Now, so maybe right now would be actually, I'm looking at the clock, it would be a really great time to maybe practice one of those techniques that we were talking a little bit, and just doing the breathing technique to kind of just, we've gotten through some pretty tough questions here. And thank you to all of you that are staying with us and asking us and leaning in to learn and make this world a little better. But Jen, do you want to lead us in a quick kind of just breathing exercise to kind of just clear it up a little bit and get back into your work?
Sure. So I'm going to have, wherever you all are, if you can just sit back in your chair and either close your eyes or just lower your gaze so you're not looking at the screen and you're kind of blurring out the world around you a bit. So if that means closing your eyes, you're comfortable, great. And just take a big breath in and exhale through your mouth. Notice in your body where you might feel tightness or constriction. It could be your jaw or your mouth. It could be your neck or shoulders. Sometimes in the pit of your stomach. And just go to that place and literally kind of offer it some attention and kindness and some extra breaths. So we're going to take in 5 slow, deep breaths together. Breathing in through your nose for 5. And exhaling through your mouth for 5. Breathing in. Exhaling. Breathing in for 5. Exhaling. In for 5. And exhaling. Last one, biggest breath of the day. Biggest breath in. Filling your belly, filling your lungs. And exhaling. And just feeling yourself sink into the chair. And feeling the chair support you. Check back in with those places that were holding some tension. Wiggle your fingers and toes. I did a fast one today, but we'll come back to the moment, present moment, opening your eyes when you're ready. So even just that little breath break is an indicator to our nervous system that we're actually okay. So our brains, like I said earlier, are programmed to protect us. So when we hear words like racism or white supremacy or harm, or my family doesn't do this and I wish they would, right? This happens. Because our brain is literally thinking, "Ooh, careful, protect, protect." And letting us use our breath to remind our body, it literally reminds our brain that we're actually not in danger. Because when we are in danger, our body can switch and we move fast because we have to. There's no taking a deep breath when a lion jumps out at you.
No, I love that. And thank you for resetting us. I feel definitely a little bit more bigger. All right. So let's keep this powerful conversation. Oh, did you have something to say, Brenda?
Just that's a reminder, right? So we weren't necessarily having a heated conversation. It was not, right? But I was holding all the stuff in my neck. I kept doing this, right? And so just imagine that if it's heated, this break is even more important.
Yeah.
Remembering to breathe is essential.
And almost even remembering to breathe before you speak might even give you a little bit more time, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I love that. So ladies, let's keep this conversation going. If you have not yet asked a question and you are dying to ask one, we'd love to have you join us. So please post. But let's talk about the isms. So I'm going to bring this slide up because, you know, we're talking about obviously racism, but sadly, the ism list seems to be getting bigger by, it seems like the day. We were talking ageism, ableism, anti-Semitism, brandism, classism, heterosexism, lookism, racism, sexism, sizeism. Holy smokes. Like, I mean, sadly to say that this is our reality that we're dealing with. And obviously that ageism is the one core reason why women, why second act women even exist, to be honest. And so, you know, my other half here had this great comment about, you know, what's interesting is women, no matter your shade, over 50 and over 40 and 50 plus, are experiencing an ism. And depending, again, on what color you are, you may be experiencing 2, 3, 4 of those isms. So exactly how you're feeling about not getting the job because of your age, or being told you look good for your age, or feeling invisible is an ism. And it's interesting because I think we talk about these backhanded compliments, or we talk about these comments that I think we've grown up with in our generation that seem to be okay. Like she's saying, you look good for your age, typically would have been a compliment. We would have said, oh, why, thank you. That means I look young, right? Same thing with some of the conversations that we have, obviously, with race, with size, you know, all the other isms that we had on that list. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, your work around the isms. And like I said, sadly, it's a continued to grow. But so here's a statement that I found that I would love to get your opinion on. It says, everyone, intentionally or unintentionally, is complicit with oppression, even if you're a nice person or it's not your direct fault that certain groups of people are oppressed. I'm curious to know what you guys think about that. Brenda,
Amen.
I see your taken. Let's start with you, girl.
Amen.
Yeah. Right.
Where is the lie? It doesn't exist. Absolutely. And as I was thinking about the isms, because I also happen to work at a barrier-free school, right? And we used to have kids come in. These isms are really, for me, they stem from a scarcity mindset. I need to have more, and I can't give to you, or you can't have what so it's all about, like, and it's also about power as well. And it's also, in order for myself to feel better, there has to be something wrong with someone else. So there are all these different layers that are around that. And I think that, man, that's a loaded statement. I'd like to chew on. I could probably write like a paper on that bad boy.
But
Because,
that really piggybacks on the idea of unconscious bias, that we all have it. No matter how good a person, no matter if you contributed to, racism or not, the fact is, we all have it. So, okay, all right, jump in, Brenda.
Because here's the thing, and then Jen, I'm sorry, I'm hogging, but listen, right? Here's the thing: we live in a society built on oppression. Whether that makes you uncomfortable or not, that is a fact. Right? This country was founded on some really oppressive stuff. And we're also entrenched in a society that has been built on white supremacy, right? And so we are the fish in the bowl right now, right? So even someone like me, who is a person of color, even I have upheld white supremacist behaviors, and I have done my share of gatekeeping. We cannot, none of us are exempt from it. And I think that's, if we could just agree that, yeah, I've done some messed up things, and I've upheld some practices that are maybe not so nice. Even as women, we sometimes oppress other women, so we have to sort of really start talking about it, to deconstruct it, so that we can stop engaging, for sure. Jen, all yours.
I think I first have to say, Jen did not have the best energy of the universe.
She's like, I got an answer.
It's so contagious. I still love it. I do. I think, but something maybe to add would be the idea of power. I think we are taught that power is finite. And the idea of, like, oh, as a white person, I have to give up privileges because then that makes it fair or better. I personally do not believe that's true. I actually think that is a construct that is taught to us to uphold the current system, right? If I believe that power is limitless, that space, right? Like, people say, why are you taking up so much space? Is there like a definition of like space? There's like infinite space.
Yeah. And
yet, especially as women, we're told, like, oh, careful, don't take up too much space. Right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so true.
Right?
And as a result, we tend to play small. We stay small.
We sit little, we cross our legs, we like curl, Gosh, yeah. And so if you think about the way, that's the conditioning, right? That's the unconscious bias. It's like that deep in us. And when we are able to do these little shifts of, like, wait a minute, what if it's not that I have to, like, give up privileges or power or come from like a white savior place and like help people. It's actually this deeper work of liberation that happens, like today, in community. When we surface this together and see the world differently, because we're coming from a different liberated place.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I love that, how that ties into just the idea of creating space, making space. Space is limitless. So that means that, don't take offense, don't take defense. Like, the idea of just, we can all coexist.
Yeah.
And see humanity first versus the color, the age, the gender, whatever it might be. And we can all coexist, I think, is just phenomenal. Yeah, Brenda.
So, I'm going to say something in Spanish. It's an adage, right? That we have, I'm sure they have this in Mexico, but in Puerto Rico, we say, donde come uno, comen dos. So the idea is that if there's enough food for one person, there's actually enough food for two people, right? So this idea that there isn't enough, it's also at the core of our fear. Like, I can't be without, The other issue is too around power, right? Is that we also live in a society where there's a lot of power over.
That's right.
And so our needs are constantly being threatened by power over. Well, I can't say anything at work because I'll lose my job, or I can't say anything, you know, it's constant. We're constantly worried about being without. And so that's also something else that we can't negate, right? Because we got to put food on the table too.
Yeah.
But this space is where it happens. This is where the
And
magic.
I love, let me bring up, and I loved what this participant or this viewer also mentioned. She said, don't envy the space others hold. Like everybody, I mean, I could go on for that. I think that's just awesome.
Comparison, right? Comparison is like baked into our culture.
Yeah.
And competition.
And competition. And like, what if we're actually not competing? What if it's not that like so-and-so is better or worse than me? It's that we just do different things, or we do them in different ways.
Yeah. And the opportunity being, what can I learn to have my own arsenal so that, I navigate in a different way and I continue to grow and learn versus walk the line of just, this is what I know, this is what I'm comfortable with. Yeah, I don't want to step into any other spaces.
Yo, I just realized I'm not 48, I'm 49.
You know what? You saw Jen's and you're like, I want to be 48 too.
I love 49. Chapter 49.
Oh my gosh. Ladies, well, we are nearing the end of our show, but this has been fantastic. And, to those that hanged in with us, that, joined us for this conversation, we really appreciate you. We appreciate that you made the space, the time to join us, because we truly, I think with everyone shaking their head here, we truly believe that it's these conversations that will change the world that we live in today and create the world we want to see and leave behind to future generations. And that's why we need to have these conversations, and we hope to have more. And we invite you to continue the conversation. Jen, and Brenda, we've put your information, my other half is awesomely putting information into our Facebook group here. You'll have their LinkedIn information, but obviously they're both in our community as well too. So if you want to continue the conversation, please reach out to them and ask what's on your mind so that you can get some closure and some understanding to move forward in your life. And I love this comment. She says, "Love you girls from Verona." Just wanted to shout out to all of you for both of you for taking the time to join us today. And with that said, I guess any last remarks that you want to share with the community, as we close it up? We've talked about white privilege. We've talked about making space, the isms, how to invite people into a space where they choose not to want to engage with you on what's going on in the world. Any other, you've already shared thousands of nuggets that I think these ladies are going to take with and learn from, but anything else you'd like to share with our community? And Brenda, we'll start with you.
So I want to say that an hour is not enough, right? Because there's a bunch of things that we haven't even talked about, right? The big question that comes up in my circle is, I don't know how to even enter or what to say, or how, there's just so much, and just please do the work. Do the work. Just start somewhere. Start wherever you are. Start somewhere on your own.
And I think on that comment, Cheryl said, "Hey, can you post the resources that you ladies commented?" So maybe I'd love to invite you, Jen and Brenda, maybe afterwards to go into this post and share the books, the articles that you all mentioned, so that these ladies can continue learning. So thank you for that, Brenda. And Jen, what would you like to share?
Same. I would love to share some resources online. I think even today, like, honor yourself for taking the step today. I hope you learned a lot, and like, it was okay, right? We're like a mixed race group of women who are standing up for something that we think is important to us, and it's okay. We did a good job today. Like, we engaged in some good conversation, and I think this can happen more and more, and that's how movements spread. Women coming together to talk about what's important to them, like, changes the world. So there's like something there to me that's like, what should we keep doing that?
Mic drop on that one, girl.
Right?
Totally true. Yeah. Heck, even just what we've seen, what Barbara and I have seen with Second Act Women is tremendous. What, when you get like-minded women on a mission to create good work, the conversation, the ideas, they flow. But it sometimes takes just getting it started. and starting somewhere. So don't worry about it being perfect. Don't worry about saying the right things, the wrong things. You'll learn with every conversation, but you won't learn if you don't have the conversation.
That's right. That's right. And I think Brenda and I are in cahoots. We're going to try and do some offerings for the community. So stay tuned and we'll let you know. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your amazingness with our community. We appreciate you both and the powerful and transformative work you both are doing. So thank you so much.
Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, as we wrap up our show, thank you to all those that have stuck with us. I wanted to highlight a little bit of some of the events that are coming up on tap with Second Act Women. For those that have always wanted to start a business, but maybe don't have the idea of what they want to do, join us on the 8th, this Thursday, for the Girlfriend's Guide to Franchising with Jane Stein. She is going to be giving you the ins and outs about how to launch a franchise, what to pick, how to start, and how to make some money. Gotta love that one, right? And then on the 22nd, we are running 2 workshops. The morning workshop is with Angie VM. It's how to launch an e-commerce store. You figured out what you want to do, but how do you now start making passive income and creating a site that actually helps you grow your pocketbook? Definitely want to attend that one. And then lastly, in the afternoon at 5:30 p.m., we have Write an About Me page that grows your business. So the About Me page is the second most popular page that people visit after going to your website. So what does yours say about you? And is it saying what you want them to say? So if not, check it out and please join us. You can register at SecondActWomen.com to get more information. On tap for next month is my other half, my work wife, Barb. She is going to be talking with Rob Brown. He is an expert, the founder of Denver Real Estate Group, Guard Your Vote, and he is also an amazing Second Act Women advisor. We're beyond thrilled to have him with us. Wanted to say thank you so much again for making the space, taking the time, and leaning in with us. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Have a good one. Bye-bye.